The scream tore through the frozen air like something dying, and Hannah Jameson realized with terrible clarity that the sound was coming from her own throat. She had been standing in front of the general store for 3 hours now, and the winter storm had transformed from a gentle dusting of snowflakes into something vicious and unforgiving. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago, which she knew meant something bad, something dangerous. The door to the store remained locked. She could see Mrs. Patterson through the frosted window, deliberately turning her back every time Hannah knocked. The whole town of Fort Bridger, Wyoming, had made their decision clear. She was no longer welcome inside anywhere, no longer considered worthy of basic human decency. It was December 1876, and Hannah had learned the hard way that small frontier towns had long memories and cruel hearts when they decided someone had transgressed their invisible rules. Her crime had been refusing Alderman Peterson's son when he had cornered her behind the church social last month, pushing his hands where they did not belong. She had slapped him hard enough to leave a mark, and the next day his father had spread word throughout Fort Bridger that Hannah Jameson was a woman of loose morals who had tried to seduce young Thomas Peterson. In a town of barely 400 souls, where the winter could kill you and neighbors were supposed to be your lifeline, being cast out was a death sentence. Her employer at the boarding house had dismissed her immediately. Her landlord had given her 1 day to pack her meager belongings before changing the locks. The church had turned her away when she sought sanctuary. Even the doctor had refused to see her when she had twisted her ankle 2 weeks ago, forcing her to wrap it herself with strips torn from her only spare dress. And now, in the middle of a snowstorm that the old-timers were calling the worst they had seen in a decade, every door in Fort Bridger remained firmly shut against her. Hannah's legs gave out, and she crumpled against the storefront, her thin coat doing nothing to protect her from the wind that howled down from the mountains. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die in the snow because she had dared to protect herself. The injustice of it burned almost as hot as the cold, but rage could not keep her alive. Nothing could, not anymore. She closed her eyes and felt the snow beginning to bury her. She did not know how long she sat there, feeling herself slip away by degrees. The world became distant, muffled, almost peaceful. Death, she thought, might not be so terrible after all. At least it would be warm. The voice cut through her fading consciousness like a knife. That ends right now. Hannah forced her eyes open, squinting against the snow. A man stood over her, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a snow-covered hat. He wore a heavy coat and riding gloves, and behind him she could just make out the shape of a horse stamping impatiently in the storm. "Leave me," she managed to whisper. Her lips felt frozen, the words coming out slurred. "They will turn on you too. Let them try." His voice was deep, rough with anger that was clearly not directed at her. He crouched down and she saw his face properly for the first time. He was maybe 25 or 26, with strong features weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes that blazed with fury, and a jaw set with determination. "Can you stand?" "I do not think so." Without another word, he scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. Hannah wanted to protest, to tell him to put her down before the town punished him too, but her body would not cooperate. She felt him carry her through the snow, heard his boots crunching through the drifts, and then they were moving up wooden steps. A door crashed open under the force of his kick. "What in the name of hell do you think you are doing?" Mrs. Patterson's shrill voice cut through the warmth of the general store. "Saving a life," the man said flatly. "Get blankets, hot water if you have it, coffee, food. That woman is not welcome in my establishment. You can take her and yourself right back out into that storm." Hannah felt the man's arms tighten around her protectively. I am going to say this once, and you would be wise to listen carefully. You are going to help this woman, or I am going to stand right here in the middle of your store and tell every person who walks through that door exactly what kind of Christian you are. The kind who leaves a young woman to freeze to death rather than extend basic human decency. How long do you think your business will survive when word spreads to the other towns, to the trading posts, to the military fort? There was a long silence. Hannah could feel Mrs. Patterson's hatred radiating across the room, but she could also hear the calculation in that silence. Fort Bridger sat on important trade routes. Reputation mattered. Fine, Mrs. Patterson bit out, but she is your responsibility. She is her own responsibility. I am just making sure she survives to take it. He carried Hannah toward the pot-bellied stove in the corner and settled her carefully into a chair. Stay with me. What is your name? Hannah Jameson. Hannah, I am Hayes Callahan. I need you to stay awake, do you understand? Can you do that for me? She nodded, though keeping her eyes open felt like the hardest thing she had ever done. Hayes Callahan moved with swift efficiency, pulling blankets from Mrs. Patterson's reluctant hands and wrapping them around Hannah's shoulders. He knelt in front of her and began gently removing her soaked boots and stockings, his touch careful despite the urgency in his movements. These are frozen solid, he muttered. How long were you out there? 3 hours. Maybe 4. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. 3 hours. In this storm. He looked toward Mrs. Patterson, who had retreated behind her counter with a pinched expression. You watched her freeze for 3 hours. She brought her troubles on herself, Mrs. Patterson said primly. No trouble justifies murder, because that is what this is. Murder by neglect. Hayes turned back to Hannah, his expression softening. Your feet are bad, but I do not think you have permanent damage yet. The pain is going to get worse as they warm up. I am sorry, but there is no way around it. He was right. As warmth began to creep back into her extremities, the pain came with it, sharp and intense. Hannah bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Hayes saw her struggle and moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. Squeeze if you need to, as hard as you want. I have roped steers and broken horses. You will not hurt me. She squeezed, and he did not flinch even when her nails dug into his palm. Mrs. Patterson grudgingly brought coffee and some day-old bread, slamming them down on the barrel beside Hannah's chair. Hayes held the cup to Hannah's lips himself, letting her take small sips until she could hold it on her own. Why? Hannah asked when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. I do not need to know you to know that what they did is wrong. Hayes's jaw tightened. I have seen this before. Small towns that turn mean, that decide one person is acceptable to sacrifice so the rest can feel righteous. It makes me sick. They will make your life difficult now. I was riding through. I am not staying long enough for them to make anything difficult. He paused, studying her face. But you are, I assume. You have nowhere else to go. Hannah looked away, shame burning in her chest. I have an aunt in Cheyenne. I have been trying to save enough for the stage fair. I was working at the boarding house, but they dismissed me. She hesitated, then decided he deserved to know the truth since he had saved her life. The alderman's son tried to force himself on me. I fought him off. He told his father I tried to seduce him, and the whole town believed it, or pretended to, which amounts to the same thing. Hayes's expression went cold and dangerous. Which alderman? It does not matter. You cannot fight the whole town. Maybe not. But I do not have to sit quiet while they commit murder either. He stood up, his presence filling the small space near the stove. How much do you need? For the stage fair, I cannot take your money. I am not offering charity. I am offering you a choice. You can stay here and hope this town develops a conscience, which seems unlikely, or you can take the money as a loan and pay me back someday when you are settled in Cheyenne." He pulled a leather wallet from his coat. "How much?" $15 for the fare. Maybe another 5 for food and a room when I arrive." The words felt like ash in her mouth. She had never been dependent on anyone's charity, had always made her own way. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Hayes counted out $25 and pressed them into her hand. "Extra for a decent coat. That thing you are wearing would not keep a summer breeze out." Before she could protest, he held up a hand. "Not negotiable. I did not pull you out of a snowstorm just to have you freeze on the way to Cheyenne." Tears burned behind Hannah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of Mrs. Patterson, who was watching from behind her counter with barely concealed disgust. "Thank you. I will repay you, I promise. I believe you." Hayes pulled another chair close to the stove and sat down, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "Storm is not letting up. Looks like we are both stuck here for a while. Tell me about Cheyenne. You have family there." They talked as the storm raged outside, and Hannah found herself telling this stranger things she had kept locked inside for weeks. About how her parents had died of fever 3 years ago, leaving her alone in Fort Bridger. About her work at the boarding house, the long hours and meager pay that she had endured, because at least it was honest work. About her Aunt Catherine, her mother's sister, who had written last spring inviting Hannah to come stay with her in Cheyenne. But Hannah had been too proud to accept what felt like pity. "Pride can keep you warm," Hayes said, "but it cannot keep you alive. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do." "Is that why you helped me? Because it was brave?" "I helped you because it was right." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "My sister died 2 years ago. She was in a situation not unlike yours. Different town, different circumstances, but the same cruel judgment. She walked into a river rather than face another day of it. I was working a cattle drive 300 miles away. I did not even know until it was too late to help her." Hannah's hand found his without thinking. "I am sorry." "So am I. Sorry I was not there. Sorry I did not see the signs in her letters. Sorry this world is harder on women than it has any right to be." He looked at their joined hands, but he did not pull away. "Her name was Marie. She was 20 years old, and she deserved better than what she got. So when I saw you out there in the snow, saw this whole town just letting you freeze, I thought of her. And I thought, not again. Not while I am here to stop it." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Mrs. Patterson had retreated to the back room, making her disapproval clear through her absence. Hannah knew she should feel uncomfortable sitting here with a strange man, holding his hand like they were old friends or something more. But Hayes Callahan did not feel like a stranger. He felt like salvation, like an answer to a prayer she had stopped believing would be heard. "Where were you headed?" she asked eventually. "Before you stopped." "South. I have a job waiting in Colorado, ranch work through the winter, but it can wait a few days." He met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. "I want to make sure you get on that stage safely. This town has already shown what it is capable of. I do not trust them not to try something else. You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to. I want to." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. "Let me see this through, Hannah. Let me know you got out safe." She should say no. She should insist she could manage on her own, that she had imposed enough already. But the truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of what would happen when Hayes left. Terrified that the town would find some new way to punish her. Terrified of being alone again in a place that wanted her dead. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." The storm lasted through the night, and Hayes paid Mrs. Patterson for a room at the back of the store where Hannah could rest. He stayed by the stove, refusing a bed for himself, saying he had slept in worse places. Hannah lay awake on the narrow cot, listening to the wind and thinking about the man on the other side of the door who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. She knew better than to read too much into kindness. Hayes was doing what any decent person would do, and he would leave as soon as he saw her safely on the stage to Cheyenne. She would probably never see him again, and that was fine. It had to be fine. She could not afford to develop feelings for a drifting cowboy who had his own life, his own path. Even if his eyes made her feel seen for the first time in months, even if his touch had been the gentlest thing she had experienced since her mother died, even if the sound of his voice made her feel safe in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. She fell asleep telling herself not to be foolish, and dreamed of dark eyes and calloused hands that held her like she was something precious. Morning came gray and cold, but the storm had passed. Hayes was already awake when Hannah emerged from the back room, and he had managed to coerce Mrs. Patterson into providing a hot breakfast of eggs and bacon. They ate in silence while the proprietor glared at them from across the store, and then Hayes walked Hannah to the boarding house to collect her belongings. The landlord tried to deny her entry, but Hayes's presence changed his mind quickly. Hannah gathered her few possessions into a worn carpet bag, her whole life fitting into one small container. It should have felt pathetic, but with Hayes standing in the doorway like a guardian, it just felt like freedom. She was leaving. She was getting out. They spent the day making preparations. Hayes bought her a new coat from the general store, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's huffing disapproval, and insisted she pick out a pair of sturdy boots as well. He took her to the stage office and purchased her ticket for the morning departure. And then, because there were hours left to kill and nowhere welcome to spend them, they walked to the edge of town where the land opened up into rolling plains beneath the snow. "It is beautiful," Hannah said, looking out at the endless white. "I never let myself see it before. I was too busy trying to survive to notice. That is what this land does. It demands everything from you, and if you are not careful, you forget to actually live while you are surviving." Hayes stood beside her, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Colorado is supposed to be beautiful too. Mountains that touch the sky. I have never been, but the foreman who hired me said it was worth seeing. You move around a lot. Since Marie died, yes. I cannot seem to settle. Every place starts to feel wrong after a while, like I am supposed to be somewhere else, but I do not know where." He paused. "I had a homestead once in Montana. After Marie, I could not stand to stay there, sold it and started drifting. Do you regret it? Sometimes. But staying felt like drowning. At least drifting feels like moving forward, even if I do not know where I am going." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What about you? What are you going to do in Cheyenne? Find work. Help my aunt with her boarding house. Maybe eventually save enough to start something of my own, though I do not know what." She pulled her new coat tighter, grateful for its warmth. "I always wanted to open a dress shop. I am good with a needle, but that feels like a foolish dream now." "Why foolish? You are young, you have your whole life ahead of you. Why not dream?" "Because dreams require hope, and I am running low on that lately." Hayes turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to rest on her shoulders. The gesture was bold, familiar in a way it should not have been, but Hannah did not pull away. "Listen to me. What happened here, what this town did to you, that was not about who you are. That was about their small minds and smaller hearts. You defended yourself from a predator and they punished you for it. That tells me everything I need to know about them and nothing about you. Do not let them take your dreams too. They have already taken enough." His words broke something open inside her, and suddenly the tears she had been holding back for weeks came pouring out. She turned her face into his coat, and his arms came around her, holding her steady while she shook with the force of her crying. He did not tell her to stop or that everything would be fine. He just held her and let her grieve for everything she had lost. When the tears finally subsided, Hannah pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry. I got your coat wet. I do not care about the coat." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. "You needed that. Do not apologize for being human." They walked back to town as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Hayes had arranged for them to have dinner at the hotel restaurant, the one establishment in Fort Bridger that could not legally refuse to serve them as long as they paid. The meal was tense, with other diners whispering and pointing, but Hayes ignored them all with an ease that Hannah envied. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her stories about his travels, the places he had seen and the people he had met. "There was this ranch in Nebraska," he said, cutting into his steak, "where the owner had trained his dog to herd chickens. Funniest thing I ever saw, this border collie running around trying to keep chickens in line like they were cattle. The chickens had no idea what was happening. They would just stand there looking confused while this dog circled them." Hannah laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? Did it work? Not even a little bit. But that dog was determined. I admired the effort if not the results. He grinned at her, and Hannah felt something warm unfold in her chest. This man made her feel light, made her feel like maybe the world was not entirely cruel after all. They lingered over coffee until the restaurant staff started giving them pointed looks. Hayes paid the bill and walked her back to the general store, where Mrs. Patterson had grudgingly agreed to let Hannah stay one more night in the back room. "Stage leaves at 8 tomorrow morning," Hayes said, standing in the cold street outside the store. "I will be here at 7 to walk you over. You do not have to do that. I know." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I will be here anyway." Hannah looked up at him, at this man who had appeared out of a snowstorm and changed everything. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that would express the gratitude and the strange yearning that had taken root in her heart. But the words would not come. Hayes seemed to understand anyway. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sleep well, Hannah Jameson. Tomorrow starts your new life." She barely slept, too aware that tomorrow meant goodbye. The room was cold, the bed uncomfortable, but none of that mattered compared to the ache in her chest when she thought about Hayes riding south while she headed east. They were two ships passing, she told herself. Two people thrown together by circumstance who would part and forget each other in time. But she knew she was lying. She would not forget Hayes Callahan. Not his kindness, not his strength, not the way he looked at her like she mattered. And that was going to hurt for a long time. He was waiting outside the store when she emerged at 7, his horse saddled and ready. Hannah tried not to notice how her heart lifted at the sight of him, tried not to think about how natural it felt when he took her bag and offered his arm. They walked to the stage office through streets just beginning to wake. A few early risers stared as they passed, but Hayes met every glare with a challenging look that sent them scurrying. At the office, he loaded her bag onto the coach and spoke briefly with the driver, pressing money into the man's hand along with what looked like firm instructions. The driver nodded seriously and promised to see Miss Jameson safely to Cheyenne. "That was not necessary," Hannah said when Hayes returned to her side. "I know." He gave her that small smile that did things to her composure. "Consider it making sure I do not worry." Other passengers were beginning to board, a merchant and his wife, a young man who looked like a clerk or schoolteacher. Hannah knew she should get on the stage, should start this new chapter of her life. But her feet would not move. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life. That is not something I can ever repay. I do not want repayment. I just want you to be safe, to be happy." Hayes pulled an envelope from his pocket and pressed it into her hands. "This is the address of the ranch in Colorado where I will be working, at least through spring. If you need anything, anything at all, you write to me there. And even if you do not need anything, I would like to hear that you arrived safely, that you are settling in." Hannah clutched the envelope, her throat tight. "I will write, I promise." "Good." He hesitated, and for a moment Hannah thought he might say something more. But then the stage driver called for final boarding, and the moment passed. Hayes took her hand and helped her up into the coach, his touch lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. She settled by the window and looked down at him, memorizing his face. The way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the set of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes that made her feel like she was worth saving. "Hayes," she called as the driver climbed up to his seat. He looked up, and she said the only thing she could think of. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself, Hannah." His voice carried over the sounds of the horses stamping and the driver gathering the reins. "And do not let anyone make you feel small again. You are worth 100 of these people." The stage lurched into motion, and Hannah pressed her hand against the window. Hayes stood in the street watching until they rounded a corner and he disappeared from view. Only then did she let the tears come, silent and hot, down her cheeks. The merchant's wife, a kindly woman named Mrs. Brennan, offered her a handkerchief and a sympathetic pat on the knee. "Leaving someone behind. I only knew him for a day," Hannah said, her voice thick. "Sometimes a day is enough to recognize something real, Mrs." Brennan settled back into her seat with a knowing look. The good ones are worth remembering. The journey to Cheyenne took 3 days, with overnight stops at way stations that offered questionable beds and worse food. Hannah spent the hours alternating between excitement about her new life and a strange, hollow feeling when she thought about Hayes heading in the opposite direction. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Women did not fall in love with men they had known for a day. That was the stuff of dime novels, not real life. But her heart did not seem to care about logic. It just knew that it had found something rare and good and had been forced to let it go. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon at midday on the 3rd day of travel, a sprawling town that made Fort Bridger look like a village. Buildings lined streets that actually had names posted on signs. There were multiple hotels, several churches, a proper hospital. Hannah felt both intimidated and thrilled. This was a place where she could disappear into anonymity, where no one would know her history or judge her for defending herself. Aunt Catherine was waiting at the stage office, just as her telegram had promised. She was older than Hannah remembered, her face more lined, but her smile was warm and genuine. She pulled Hannah into a fierce hug the moment she stepped down from the coach. "Thank God you are here safe. I have been so worried ever since I got your letter." Catherine held her at arm's length, studying her face. "You look tired, and too thin. We are going to fix that, starting with a proper meal. Come on, the boarding house is just 2 streets over." Catherine's boarding house was a 3-story structure with cheerful yellow paint and white trim. Inside, it was clean and warm, with lace curtains in the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Catherine showed Hannah to a small room on the 2nd floor that overlooked the street. "It is not much, but it is yours for as long as you need it," Catherine said, setting Hannah's carpetbag on the bed. "Rest today. Tomorrow we can talk about you helping with the house. I could use someone good with mending and cooking. The pay is not much, but room and board are included. That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Aunt Catherine, for taking me in. Family takes care of family. That is all there is to it. Catherine squeezed her shoulder. Now rest. Dinner is at 6 and I expect you at the table. Left alone, Hannah unpacked her few belongings and sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to fully absorb the change in her circumstances. 2 days ago, she had been freezing to death outside a general store. Now she was in a clean room with a soft bed and family who wanted her. It felt like a dream, except for the persistent ache in her chest when she thought about Hayes. She pulled the envelope from her coat pocket and opened it carefully. Inside was the address of the ranch in Colorado where he would be working, along with a short note in angular handwriting. Hannah, you are stronger than you know. Build a good life. You deserve nothing less. Hayes. She read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and tucked it under her pillow. Tomorrow she would start her new life. Tonight she would let herself miss the man who had given it to her. The first weeks in Cheyenne passed in a blur of activity. Catherine's boarding house catered to traveling businessmen, temporary workers, and the occasional family passing through. Hannah threw herself into the work, cooking meals, mending linens, cleaning rooms. She was good at it, efficient and thorough, and Catherine praised her efforts. You have a real knack for making people comfortable, her aunt said one evening as they folded laundry together. Several of our regulars have commented on how much better things have been running since you arrived. Hannah smiled, genuinely pleased. It felt good to be useful, to be valued for her work rather than judged for circumstances beyond her control. Cheyenne was everything Fort Bridger had not been. People here were too busy with their own lives to care about her past. She could walk down the street without hostile stares. She could shop in stores without being turned away. She could breathe. But at night, alone in her room, she thought about Hayes. She had written to him a week after arriving, keeping the letter brief and factual. She told him she had arrived safely, that her aunt was kind, that she had found work. She did not tell him that she missed him, that she found herself looking for his face in crowds, that sometimes she woke from dreams where he was holding her and felt the loss like a physical pain. She did not expect a reply. He was a drifter, he had said so himself. He probably received her letter, felt satisfied that he had done his good deed and moved on with his life. That was fine. It had to be fine. So when a letter arrived at the boarding house 3 weeks after she had sent hers, addressed in that familiar angular handwriting, Hannah's hands shook so badly she could barely open it. Dear Hannah, I was glad to receive your letter and to know you are safe and settling in. Colorado is as beautiful as promised, all mountains and endless sky. The work is hard but satisfying. The other ranch hands are good people, and the foreman treats everyone fairly. I should be content, but I find myself thinking about Fort Bridger more than I would like. Not the town, which can rot for all I care, but about one particular person I met there. I hope you do not think me forward for saying this, but I have thought of you every day since the stage pulled away. I wonder if you have thought of me too, or if I am just a cowboy who helped you once and faded into memory. Either way, I hope you are well. I hope you are dreaming again. Write if you want to. I find I look forward to letters more than I used to. Hayes. Hannah read the letter until she had it memorized, tracing the words with her fingertip. He thought about her. He wondered if she thought about him. The careful way he phrased it, not wanting to presume, told her everything she needed to know about his character and nothing about what she should do with this information. She wrote back that same night, her pen flying across the paper. Dear Hayes, I would be lying if I said I had not thought of you. In fact, I think of little else, which is inconvenient considering we spent barely more than a day together. But that day changed my life. You gave me hope when I had none, and safety when I was in danger. More than that, you saw me. Really saw me, not as a victim or a problem, but as a person. I do not know how to express what that meant, still means. Cheyenne is good. My aunt is kind. The work is honest and satisfying. But I confess that Colorado sounds beautiful too, and I find myself curious about mountains and endless skies and ranch work. Tell me more about your days. I want to know everything. Hannah. She sent the letter before she could second-guess herself, and then spent the next 2 weeks in an agony of anticipation. Had she been too forward? Had she revealed too much? Would he think her silly or desperate? His reply came on a Tuesday, delivered by the postal worker just as Hannah was serving lunch to the boarders. She tucked it into her apron pocket and forced herself to wait until her chores were done before retreating to her room to read it. Hannah, your letter made me smile for the first time in longer than I can remember. I am glad you think of me. I was afraid I had imagined the connection between us, that what felt significant to me was just gratitude on your part. But your words suggest otherwise, and I confess that gives me hope for something I had not dared to consider. My days are simple. I wake before dawn and work until dark, mostly mending fences and tending cattle. The foreman, a man named Jack Carter, has started teaching me about ranch management. He says I have a head for it, that I could run my own spread someday if I wanted. The idea appeals to me more than I expected. After years of drifting, the thought of putting down roots somewhere has started to feel less like drowning and more like possibility. I find myself imagining what that might look like, and more, those imaginings include a certain woman with courage enough to survive Fort Bridger and grace enough to forgive me for my presumption in writing such things. If I am overstepping, tell me and I will stop. But if I am not, write back soon. Your letters are the best part of my days. Hayes. Hannah pressed the letter to her chest, her heart racing. This was real. Whatever was happening between them, it was real and mutual and terrifying and wonderful. She wrote back immediately, and thus began a correspondence that spanned the winter months. The letters came weekly, sometimes more often. Hayes told her about the ranch, about learning to manage livestock and read the weather. About Jack Carter and his wife Maria, who fed Hayes at their table and teased him about his lack of a wife. About the other hands, the practical jokes they played, the camaraderie that developed among men working hard together. And carefully, tentatively, he told her about his feelings. About how her letters were the first thing he looked for every week. About how he had started making plans for a future that included her, if she was willing. Hannah wrote back with equal honesty. She told him about the boarding house, about the satisfaction of building something good with her aunt. About the dress shop she dreamed of opening someday. About the mountains she could see from Cheyenne's streets and how she wondered if they were the same mountains he saw from Colorado. About how she went to sleep every night thinking of him and woke every morning hoping for a letter. About how she was falling in love with him through words on paper and did not know how to handle the longing that came with it. Winter gave way to early spring, and their letters became more explicit in their affection. Hayes wrote that he was saving money, that by summer he would have enough set aside to make a trip to Cheyenne if she would want to see him. Hannah wrote back that she wanted nothing more. I know we should be sensible, she wrote. I know people would say it is foolish to develop such strong feelings for someone I have spent barely more than a day with in person. But Hayes, I know you. I know your heart through your words. I know your kindness through your actions. I know your strength and your gentleness and your dreams. If that is not a foundation for love, I do not know what is. Come to Cheyenne, please. I want to see if what we have on paper translates to real life. I think it will. I hope it will. But either way, I need to see you again. Hannah. His response came faster than any previous letter, as if he had written it the moment he received hers. Hannah, I will be there in June. Jack has agreed to give me 2 weeks. I am counting the days. I dream of seeing your face again, of hearing your voice, of holding your hand without the specter of Fort Bridger hanging over us. I am nervous and excited in equal measure. What if I am not what you remember? What if the reality disappoints after months of letters? But even with those fears, I cannot wait to see you. I will send word when I have an exact date. Until then, know that you are constantly in my thoughts. Yours, Hayes. Hannah floated through the next weeks in a haze of anticipation. Catherine noticed her distraction and teased her gently about it. There is a man, is there not? You have that look about you. Hannah blushed but did not deny it. I met him last winter in Fort Bridger. We have been corresponding. Is he a good man? The best I have ever known. Catherine smiled and patted her hand. Then I look forward to meeting him. A good man is rare and should be treasured. The telegram arrived on a Wednesday in late May. Arriving Cheyenne June 10th on afternoon stage. Cannot wait to see you, Hayes. June 10th, 2 weeks away. Hannah immediately started preparing, mending her best dress, saving a bit of money for a new ribbon for her hair. She knew she was being silly, that Hayes had seen her at her absolute worst, and it had not mattered. But she wanted to be pretty for him, wanted to show him that she was thriving, that his faith in her had been justified. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Hannah threw herself into her work, trying to make time pass faster. She deep-cleaned every room in the boarding house. She reorganized the kitchen. She made elaborate meals that had the boarders praising her cooking. But nothing made the waiting easier. Finally, June 10th arrived. Hannah spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, changing her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Catherine had to practically force her to eat lunch, laughing at her anxiety. He is already in love with you, child. You could meet him in a flour sack and he would think you beautiful. I know. I just want everything to be perfect. Love is never perfect, but if it is real, it does not need to be. Hannah arrived at the stage office an hour early and spent the time pacing and second-guessing everything. What if he took one look at her and realized he had built her up in his mind to be something she was not? What if the chemistry that had sparked in Fort Bridger had been a product of circumstance and could not be recreated? What if she had imagined the depth of feeling in his letters? The stage appeared in the distance, dust rising from the road. Hannah's heart lodged in her throat. This was it. She smoothed her dress one last time and tried to look calm and collected. The stage pulled to a stop, and passengers began to disembark. A woman with 2 children. An elderly man with a cane. A merchant carrying several cases. And then Hayes stepped down and the world stopped. He was exactly as she remembered and somehow more, taller than she had let herself picture, broader in the shoulders. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on her, his whole face transformed. The serious, careful expression melted into pure joy. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, and then he was right there in front of her, close enough to touch. For a moment they just stared at each other, taking in the reality after months of imagination. "Hannah," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Hayes." She could not seem to say anything else. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with devastating gentleness. "You are even more beautiful than I remembered. I was worried you would be disappointed. Impossible." His other hand came up to frame her face, and he looked at her like she was something precious. "I have thought about this moment every day for 4 months. The reality is better than any dream." "You should kiss me," Hannah whispered. Before I lose my nerve and remember we are standing in the middle of the street." Hayes smiled, slow and warm. "I am going to do just that." He lowered his head and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Hannah felt it all the way to her toes, this proof that what they had was real. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, and forgot about propriety or public spaces or anything but the feel of him finally in her arms. When they broke apart, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you, Hannah Jameson. I know it is too soon to say so. I know we have only spent a day together before this, but I am going to marry you if you will have me. I just thought you should know my intentions." Hannah laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "That is extremely presumptuous of you, I know. I appreciate a man who knows what he wants." "And what do you want?" She pulled back far enough to meet his eyes. "I want to get to know you, really know you, not just through letters. I want to spend every moment of the next 2 weeks discovering who you are in person. And then, if at the end of it you still want to marry me, I am going to say yes. But let us do this properly, Hayes. Let us earn this." His smile could have lit up the entire territory. "I can work with that. Where do we start?" "Dinner. My aunt is expecting us and she is dying to meet you." Hayes collected his bag from the stage and offered Hannah his arm. They walked through Cheyenne's streets together, and Hannah felt like she was glowing. People stared, but not with judgment. Just with the mild interest people always showed in young couples clearly in love. Catherine took to Hayes immediately. Over dinner, she grilled him with the protective instinct of a mother, asking about his work, his prospects, his intentions. Hayes answered every question honestly and respectfully, never deflecting or trying to charm his way out of scrutiny. By the time dessert was served, Catherine was won over completely. "You will do," she told him with a smile. "Hannah deserves someone good, and you seem to fit the bill." "I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve her," Hayes replied simply. Over the next 2 weeks, Hayes and Hannah spent every possible moment together. He had rented a room at a different boarding house to be proper, but he took his meals with Hannah and Catherine, and they spent the days exploring Cheyenne together. They walked through the market, and Hayes bought her a bolt of beautiful blue fabric he said matched her eyes. They attended a church social, and he charmed every person he met with his quiet courtesy and obvious devotion to Hannah. They took long walks outside of town, where Hayes told her stories about Colorado and Hannah shared her dreams of opening a dress shop. "I have been saving," she told him one afternoon as they sat by a creek watching the water flow past. "Between my wages and what I can put aside from mending work on the side, I have almost $60. In a year, maybe 2, I will have enough for a small shop. What if you did not have to wait 2 years?" Hayes pulled her hand into his lap, tracing her fingers with his own. "What if you could open your shop this year in Colorado?" Hannah's heart skipped. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that Jack Carter has made me an offer. He wants to retire from active management and focus on breeding stock. He asked if I would be interested in partnering with him, taking over the day-to-day operations of the ranch. It would mean steady income, good income, enough to support a wife and maybe even provide startup capital for a business in town." "Hayes, that is wonderful. But I do not understand what it has to do with me." He shifted to face her fully, his expression serious. "Marry me, Hannah. Not because I saved you once, not because we have written pretty letters for 4 months. Marry me because I love you, because I want to build a life with you. Because the thought of getting on that stage next week and leaving you behind makes me feel like I am tearing my own heart out." Tears blurred Hannah's vision. "We have known each other such a short time. I know, and if you need more time, I will give it to you. I will come back in the fall, or you can come to Colorado to visit. We can court for a year or 2 years or however long you need. But Hannah, I am not going to change my mind. I knew in Fort Bridger, watching you refuse to give up even when the whole world seemed against you. I knew reading your letters, seeing your strength and humor and dreams on paper. And I know now, spending these days with you, you are who I want. You are who I choose. I choose you too. The words came out in a rush. I love you, Hayes. I have loved you since that first night when you held my hand and made me believe I was worth saving. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want everything. Hayes kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Hannah kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of 4 months apart. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. We should probably tell your aunt before we get any more improper. Hannah laughed, giddy with joy. She already knows. She told me last week that if you did not propose before you left, she was going to knock your heads together. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Catherine and several of the boarding house regulars as witnesses. Hannah wore her best dress with a crown of wildflowers Hayes had picked that morning. Hayes wore a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion, though Hannah had told him it was not necessary. I want to look like I deserve to stand next to you, he had said, and Hannah had kissed him to shut him up. The ceremony was short and sweet. The minister asked if they took each other, and they both said yes with voices that did not waver. Hayes slipped a simple gold band onto Hannah's finger, and she did the same for him. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hayes cupped her face in his hands and kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning. The small gathering cheered, and Catherine cried happy tears. They had a modest celebration at the boarding house, with cake Catherine had baked and champagne someone contributed. Hayes never left Hannah's side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes full of wonder like he could not quite believe she was real. Happy, he murmured during a quiet moment, his lips brushing her temple. Happier than I knew was possible, Hannah replied honestly. Thank you for being stubborn in Fort Bridger, for not leaving me to freeze. Thank you for being worth saving, for being brave enough to build something new, for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who fell in love with you at first sight. They spent their wedding night at a hotel, Catherine having shooed them away with a knowing smile and instructions not to come back until noon the next day. Hayes carried Hannah over the threshold of their room, and she laughed at the old-fashioned gesture. I am trying to be romantic, he protested, setting her gently on her feet. You are romantic, the most romantic man I have ever known. Hannah reached up to loosen his tie, her fingers not quite steady. I am nervous, so am I. He caught her hands, bringing them to his lips. We do not have to do anything tonight, we have the rest of our lives. I want to. I just needed to tell you I am nervous, then we will go slow. And if you want to stop at any point, we stop. This is about us, Hannah, not expectations or obligations, just us. He was true to his word, patient and gentle as they undressed each other by lamplight. He told her she was beautiful, and she believed him because of the way he looked at her. He kissed her like she was precious, touched her like she might break, and when they finally came together, it was perfect in its imperfection. There was awkwardness and fumbling and laughter, but there was also overwhelming love and connection that made Hannah cry happy tears. Afterward, Hayes held her close, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back. I love you, Mrs. Callahan. I love you too. Hannah pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. Take me to Colorado, Hayes. Show me our future. They left Cheyenne a week later, after Hannah had helped train her replacement at the boarding house and said tearful goodbyes to Catherine. Her aunt had pressed an envelope into her hands at the last moment. Your parents left you a small inheritance, about $200. I have been holding it in trust. Use it for your dress shop or your home or whatever you need. Build something good, Hannah. You deserve it. The journey to Colorado took 3 days by stage and then another half-day by wagon from the nearest town to the ranch. Hayes pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his excitement building the closer they got. He told her about the ranch, about the house where they would live, about Maria Carter, who he promised would love Hannah. The ranch appeared as the sun was setting, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it. The main house was a solid 2-story structure, and Hayes explained that they would have the foreman's cottage, a smaller but comfortable building a short walk away. Jack and Maria Carter came out to greet them, and Maria immediately pulled Hannah into a warm hug. Finally, Hayes has talked of nothing but you for months. Come inside, you must be exhausted from the journey. I have stew on the stove and fresh bread. Over dinner, Jack and Maria explained the partnership arrangement. Hayes would take over management of the day-to-day operations, with Jack handling the breeding program and long-term planning. They would split profits equally, and Hayes and Hannah would live in the cottage rent-free. It was more than generous, and Hannah said so. Hayes has earned it, Jack said simply. He is the hardest worker I have ever had, and he has a natural talent for management. This is good for all of us. The cottage was perfect, a cozy space with a sitting room, kitchen, bedroom, and small spare room. Someone, probably Maria, had stocked the kitchen and left fresh flowers on the table. Hayes carried Hannah over the threshold again, and she laughed at his determination to observe every tradition. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." Hannah looked around at the simple furnishings, the clean windows, the sense of peace that permeated the space. This was home, not the building but the man standing beside her. Home was wherever Hayes was. They settled into ranch life with surprising ease. Hayes left early every morning to oversee the hands, and Hannah spent her days setting up their home, cooking, and starting to plan her dress shop. The nearest town, Boulder, was an hour's ride, but it was growing fast and had a main street full of businesses. Hannah took the wagon in one day and scouted potential locations, finding a small storefront that would be perfect. The owner quoted her a monthly rent she could afford, especially once her shop started bringing in income. She put down a deposit and signed a 6-month lease, her hands shaking with excitement. When she told Hayes that evening, he picked her up and spun her around. "I am so proud of you. When do you open?" 2 months, maybe 3. I need to build inventory, find suppliers, spread word. Maria has agreed to help with the sewing. She says half the women on the ranch need decent clothes, and they will be my first customers. Hannah threw herself into building her business with the same determination she had applied to surviving Fort Bridger. She sewed late into the night, creating simple but well-made dresses, aprons, shirts. She put up notices in Boulder and at the ranch, and when she finally opened Jameson dressmaking in September, she had a line of customers waiting. The business grew steadily. Hannah discovered she had a knack for understanding what women wanted, for creating pieces that were both practical and beautiful. She hired a young woman named Sarah to help with basic sewing, and by Christmas, she was turning a small profit. Hayes thrived as well. Under his management, the ranch ran smoothly and profitably. Jack praised his work constantly, and the hands respected him. On Sundays, their one day of rest, Hayes and Hannah would ride out into the mountains, just the two of them, and talk about their dreams. "I want children someday," Hannah said one afternoon as they sat by a mountain stream. "Not right away, but someday. Do you?" "Yes." Hayes pulled her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I want a whole house full of them. I want to give them the childhood Marie and I never really had, full of laughter and safety." Tell me about her, your sister. You never really have." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah thought he might not answer. But then he started talking, his voice soft with memory. "She was funny. That is what I remember most. Even when things were hard, Marie could find something to laugh about. She wanted to be a teacher. She was smart, loved books, loved children. But our parents died when she was 16 and she had to work instead. Took a job as a maid for a wealthy family in town. The son assaulted her. She got pregnant, and when she told his parents, they called her a liar and threw her out. The whole town turned on her. She tried to survive, tried to find work, but nobody would hire her, and one day it was just too much." Hannah turned in his arms, her hands cupping his face. "I am so sorry. She deserved better. She did. That is why I could not leave you in Fort Bridger. I could not save Marie, but I could save you. And it turned out to be the best decision I ever made because I got you." They sat in silence for a while, grieving together for a woman Hannah had never met, but felt she knew through Hayes's love. Winter came, blanketing the ranch in snow. Hannah's shop had to close for the season, as travel to Boulder became too difficult, but she continued to sew at home, building inventory for the spring. Hayes worked shorter days, coming home earlier to spend evenings with her by the fire. In February, Hannah realized her monthly courses were late, then very late. She told Maria first, needing a woman's perspective. "Oh, honey, you are pregnant." Maria hugged her tight. "How do you feel about it?" Terrified, excited. "I do not know if I am ready." "Nobody is ever ready. But you and Hayes will be wonderful parents. Tell him tonight. He is going to be over the moon." Hannah cooked Hayes's favorite meal and waited until they were settled by the fire after dinner. He could tell something was different, his eyes questioning. "I have news," she said, taking his hand. "We are going to have a baby, probably in September if I am calculating right." Hayes stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then suddenly he was on his knees in front of her, his hands on her still flat stomach, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "A baby. We are having a baby." He looked up at her, wonder written all over his face. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "I am terrified. But yes, I am happy." "Are you?" "Hannah, I am so happy I do not have words. I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." He pulled her down into his arms, holding her carefully like she was made of glass. "I am going to take such good care of you, both of you." He was true to his word. As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, Hayes became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, work less. He took over all the heavy chores at home. He rode into Boulder every week to get whatever food she was craving. Maria and Hannah joked that he was going to wrap her in cotton wool if he could. "Let him fuss," Maria advised. "Men need to feel useful, and pregnancy makes them feel helpless. If fussing makes him feel better, let him fuss." Hannah's shop reopened in April, but she hired Sarah full-time to manage it, keeping only the design and planning work for herself. Her pregnancy was progressing well, though the summer heat made everything uncomfortable. Hayes set up a shaded chair outside their cottage where Hannah could sit and work on sketches while staying cool. In early September, during a particularly hot afternoon, Hannah felt the first contractions. Maria, who had delivered dozens of babies, took charge immediately. She sent Hayes to fetch the doctor from Boulder and settled Hannah in their bed with cool cloths and calm reassurance. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Hayes returned with the doctor and spent the hours pacing outside, driving Maria crazy with his questions and anxiety. Finally, in the late afternoon, a baby's cry filled the cottage. Maria emerged, grinning. "You have a son, and Hannah is fine. Tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Hayes burst into the room and froze at the sight of Hannah propped against pillows holding a tiny bundle. She looked exhausted but radiant, and when she smiled at him, he felt his heart crack wide open. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Hayes approached slowly, almost afraid. Hannah shifted the blanket and he saw a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in a mighty yawn. He sank onto the bed beside her and reached out one finger to touch the impossibly small hand. Immediately, tiny fingers wrapped around his, gripping tight. "He is perfect," Hayes whispered. "You are perfect. Hannah, I do not even know what to say. Say hello to Henry." Hayes looked up sharply. "Henry, you want to name him after me?" Hayes, Henry Callahan. "I think it has a nice ring to it, but we will call him Henry so we do not get confused." She smiled tiredly. "Do you like it?" "I love it. I love you. I love him. I love our entire life." Hayes carefully gathered them both in his arms, overcome with emotion. This was his family. His wife, his son, his home. Everything he had never dared to believe he could have. Henry was a good baby as babies went. He slept in reasonable stretches and only fussed when he was hungry or needed changing. Hayes was a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Henry when he was fussy. Hannah watched him with their son and fell in love all over again. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and challenges. Hannah's dress shop became the most successful in Boulder, and she eventually expanded to a larger location. Hayes and Jack's partnership thrived, and when Jack finally retired completely, Hayes bought him out, becoming the sole owner of the ranch. They added onto the cottage, building more bedrooms. 2 years after Henry, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, with Hannah's blonde hair and Hayes's dark eyes. And 3 years after that, another son they called William, who came into the world screaming and did not stop until he was 6 months old. "3 is a good number," Hannah said one night after they had finally gotten all 3 children to sleep. "I think we are done." Hayes pulled her into his arms, his hand running through her hair. "3 is perfect. Our family is perfect. You are perfect." "I am exhausted and covered in spit up." "I am far from perfect." "You are perfect to me. Every day, Hannah. Every single day I wake up grateful that I happened to be riding through Fort Bridger that day. Grateful that I saw you and stopped. Grateful that you took a chance on me." Hannah looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and then built a beautiful one with her. "I am grateful, too, for your stubbornness, for your kindness, for your love. You changed everything, Hayes. We changed everything, together." They stood there in the quiet cottage, holding each other while their children slept, and Hannah thought about how far she had come. From freezing to death outside a general store to this, a life full of love and purpose and family. It had not been easy. There had been hard days and setbacks and struggles, but they had faced it all together, and that made all the difference. Henry grew into a serious boy who loved horses and wanted to be a rancher like his father. Rose was creative and clever, spending hours in Hannah's shop learning to sew and design. William was the wild one, always getting into trouble, always making them laugh. Hayes taught the children to ride, to work hard, to treat everyone with respect. Hannah taught them to read, to dream, to see the good in people. On Sundays, they would all ride out to the mountains, just like Hayes and Hannah used to do. They would have picnics by streams and tell stories and laugh. Henry would ask about how his parents met, and every time, Hayes would tell him about the snowstorm and the woman who refused to give up. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," he would say, looking at Hannah with eyes still full of love after all these years. "She fought for her life, and then she fought to build a good one. That is courage." The children grew, and the ranch prospered, and the dress shop became a fixture of Boulder. Hannah hired more seamstresses and eventually opened a second location in a neighboring town. Hayes expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land, building the operation into one of the most successful in Colorado. They became pillars of their community, known for their fairness and generosity. Sometimes, late at night, Hannah would think about Fort Bridger, about Mrs. Patterson and Alderman Peterson and all the people who had turned their backs on her. She hoped they had learned something, hoped they had grown. But mostly, she felt grateful, because their cruelty had led her to Hayes, and Hayes had led her to this life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes took Hannah back to Cheyenne to visit Catherine, who was getting older but still running her boarding house with fierce efficiency. She cried when she saw them, and cried harder when she met the grandchildren. "Look at you," she said to Hannah, holding her at arm's length. "You are so happy. That is all I ever wanted for you. I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined possible." Hannah glanced at Hayes, who was showing the children the room where she had stayed all those years ago. "He is everything good in this world. Then you both got what you deserved, a love worth fighting for." They spent a week in Cheyenne, showing the children where Hannah had lived, telling them stories about her childhood. And then they went home to Colorado, to the ranch, to the life they had built together. Years continued to pass. Henry took over more responsibility at the ranch as he got older, showing his father's same natural talent for management. Rose opened her own dress shop in Denver, building on everything her mother had taught her. William bounced between ranching and trying to become a writer, filling journals with stories about the West. Hayes and Hannah grew older together, their dark hair turning gray, their faces lining with years of laughter and love. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Sometimes they talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, content to be together. "You ever regret it?" Hayes asked one evening when they were both in their 50s. "Marrying a drifting cowboy you barely knew," Hannah looked at him, at the man who had saved her life and then filled it with so much joy. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, even when you are grumpy." "I am not grumpy. You are a little grumpy, but I love you anyway." He pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, and they sat there watching the stars come out. Their children were grown and building their own lives, but they came home often, bringing grandchildren who ran wild on the ranch just like their parents had. The house was full of noise and love, and the kind of chaos that made life worth living. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Henry and his wife brought their 3 children. Rose came from Denver with her husband and 2 daughters. William arrived with the woman he was courting, a schoolteacher from Boulder who laughed at all his jokes. Catherine even made the trip from Cheyenne, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever. They set up tables outside and filled them with food. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and singing and so much laughter. Hayes pulled Hannah into his arms and waltzed her across the grass while their family watched and cheered. 25 years, he murmured in her ear. "And I love you more today than I did that day in Cheyenne when you agreed to marry me. 25 years of putting up with me. You deserve a medal. I deserve you, which is better than any medal." He spun her out and back in, grinning at her delighted laugh. "Here is to 25 more, Mrs. Callahan. Here is to forever, Mr. Callahan." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the family they had created, the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. And Hannah thought about that girl in the snow, freezing to death outside a general store, and wanted to tell her that it would be okay. That a cowboy was coming. That he would save her, and then she would save herself, and together they would create something beautiful. The ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management when Hayes finally retired at 60. Hannah closed her dress shop at the same time, satisfied with what she had built but ready to rest. They spent their retirement traveling, visiting all the places they had never had time to see. They went to San Francisco and saw the ocean. They went to New York and saw buildings that touched the sky. They went to places far and wide, but they always came home to Colorado, to the ranch, to the mountains. When Hayes turned 70, his health started to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down that came with age. Hannah nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had applied to everything else in life. On good days, they still sat on the porch holding hands. On bad days, she lay beside him in bed and told him stories about their life together. "You remember Fort Bridger?" she asked one autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning gold. "Every day," Hayes said, his voice weaker than it used to be but still warm. "I remember thinking I had to save you, but it turned out you saved me. We saved each other." "Yes, we did." He squeezed her hand. "No regrets, Hannah, not a single one. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. Love that has sustained me through everything. How could I have regrets?" They sat there as the sun set, and Hannah thought about the decades they had shared. The laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. This was what she had dreamed of that night in the snow, though she had not known it then. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Hayes lived to see 80, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. He died peacefully in his sleep with Hannah beside him, holding his hand just like she had that first night in Fort Bridger when he had told her to squeeze as hard as she needed. The whole community came to his funeral. Ranch hands and business owners, neighbors and friends from across the territory. They told stories about Hayes's fairness, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. And Hannah listened and cried and felt grateful. Grateful for every single day she had been given with him. She lived another 10 years, surrounded by family who loved her. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had appeared in a snowstorm and changed her entire life. She told them about choosing love, about fighting for happiness, about building something good even when the world seemed determined to tear you down. On a winter morning, with snow falling gently outside, Hannah Callahan died in her sleep at the age of 90. She was buried next to Hayes on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Together forever." Their children scattered wildflowers on the graves and told their children about the love story that had started in Fort Bridger all those years ago. About a town that had been cruel, and a cowboy who had been kind, and the woman who had fought her way from freezing in the snow to building an empire of love and family and purpose. It was a story worth telling. A story about second chances and stubborn kindness, and the kind of love that saves you and asks you to save yourself. It was a story that started with Hannah Jameson outside in the snow and a passing cowboy who said, "That ends right now." And it ended with 2 lives fully lived, 2 hearts that had beaten as one, and a family that would carry their love forward into future generations. It ended with proof that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best lives, that kindness matters more than cruelty, and that real love, the kind built on respect and partnership and unwavering devotion, can transform everything. The ranch still stands, run by Henry's children now. The dress shop building in Boulder is a bookstore, but there is a plaque that tells about Hannah Jameson Callahan, who opened the town's first successful dressmaking business. And on winter nights when snow falls in Fort Bridger, Wyoming, some people swear they can still feel the ghost of injustice that happened there so long ago. But mostly, People remember the love story, the cowboy and the woman he saved, the life they built, the family they created. And they tell their own children that sometimes, when the world is at its cruelest, the right person comes along at exactly the right moment. Not to save you because you save yourself, but to stand beside you and say, that ends right now. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that person stays beside you for the rest of your life, building something beautiful from the ashes of despair. That is what Hayes and Hannah did. That is what their story means. And that is why, even now, more than a century later, people still tell the tale of the town that left her outside in the snow and the passing cowboy who changed everything.